Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, during our Newsmaker segment, we sit down with Derek Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. We have a wide range of topics to discuss, from voting to the criminal justice system. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been a while since we've had a chance to sit down with you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure thing. I want to jump right into some of the topics of the day. There has been, I think, within the think tank of the NAACP concerns about anti-black agenda, anti-DEI agenda in modern politics. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's anti-democracy. We are looking at a political climate where individuals feel under threatened because our advocacy around equal protection under the law. And for African Americans, we must take into consideration we are actually succeeding. That success has resulted in a sharp pushback. Many individuals are emboldened now to put into the public discourse the type of language and initiative that we would not have thought that they would have done out of political correctness. It's almost as if they're trying to create an apartheid type environment, a 1950s reality. Whether you talk about Supreme Court decisions, whether you talk about certain corporate behaviors, whether you're talking about media platforms like Fox News or individuals, we are confronted with an anti-democratic reality, and race is the tool that's being used to push that agenda.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think this is coming from?
It's coming from fear that the status quo as we knew it is evolving fast, that more voices being included into how policies are made, the push for a more equitable society, a sharing of wealth, power, is something that many individuals are in fear of. The demographics of this country has presented the reality that we are the most diverse we've ever been in this nation. And as a result, white men who have a sense of entitlement now feel threatened, not only about their current situation, but the future of their children, because they don't want talented individuals to be able to compete. And as a result, they're trying to suffocate our drive towards equal protection under the law and an equitable society.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think what is the biggest threat? Is it in the justice system? Is it in education? Is it in economics? And why?
It is all of the above. You cannot decouple how power is being leveraged and to protect the assumptions of a growing minority of this country. So when you think about the levers of power, those squares, whether it's an illegal system in the Supreme Court, the federal bench, or state courts, whether it's in public policy, looking at Congress today, where you have one part of Congress isn't functional and the other part of Congress cannot move policy by itself, whether it's in the executive office, whether it's in narrative control, which is really important because narrative control really influences people's behavior of whether or not they take positions that's against their own interests, whether it's at the polling place or corporate behavior. All of those are levers of power. So, and you cannot decouple one and say it's more important here versus there, because when you look at the status quo, they're going to use all of those levers to try to maintain domination and control. It is the work of the NAACP, it's the work of other advocacy groups to ensure that equal protection under the law is afforded to all citizens, and we must look at all of those levers to forge ahead.
Do you think that there is concern about these issues on a state level? I mean, you did mention obviously Congress, and there were all kinds of examples of conflict as it relates to conservative, progressive, those who support DEI, those who do not. But what about At the state level, what are you seeing?
But you can't decouple when you talk about power. It is local, it is state, it is federal, it is the interaction with all those things. Just last week, with a lawsuit filed in South Carolina around redistricting, the state legislative body drew district lines to disenfranchise African Americans. We, along with the Legal Defense Fund, we filed a lawsuit. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has now found in a way in which if you use the partisan label, you can disenfranchise Black people or minority communities. Well, that should never be the case. That's state legislative power using their tools to disenfranchise. So it's not this or that. It is all of the above. Power utilize whatever mechanisms they can to maintain status quo. That's why our fight is local, federal, and state. That's why we cannot sit out elections. That's why we cannot assume we're going to advantage ourselves only in one space and ignore another space. It is all of those things at the exact same time.
Let's talk about voting, because obviously, historically, for American civil rights organizations, and particularly with the NAACP, you could argue that is the cornerstone of the work that has been done for many, many decades. What is your take on where the Black vote is right now?
But the Black vote is as strong as it's ever been. That's why we're seeing this strong pushback. And we began to see a hard turn after the 2008 election, and then in 2012, because we were beginning to over-index in terms of our participation. It went down somewhat in 2016, only to recover in 2020. And so as a result of that, you have this push-pull. We can never concede the power of voting. The right to vote is the enabling right to all other rights. That if you are able to have input on the formation of public policy, all public policy, through the power of voting, you can influence education, you can influence economics, you can influence housing policy, you can influence environmental justice. That all comes through our ability as a community to collectively deposit that currency we call voting, so we can get the type of governance that we are entitled to. So we should never minimize the impact of voting. We should never buy into a false narrative, a false negative narrative about what we don't do or what we can't do. And we should never take for granted our ability to assume the seat of power through our vote.
You said that the Black vote is stronger than ever. How do you know that?
Well, you know about performance. Now, we are living in a democracy that if we approach 60% of voter turnout, we say it's a high turnout. Well, when you look state by state, Black performance compared to other communities, we are on par. It is not true that Black folks vote less than white people. It is not true that we don't vote. It is true that as a nation, we're not voting at where we should be. Australia, with cumulative voting, 95% of eligible voters participate. In Canada, we're talking about the neighborhood of 92%. In Germany, we're talking about 93%. In the United States, across all communities, if we approach 6%, we say it's a high voter turnout. But when we as a community actually put our mind to it, we elect Black presidents. When we put our mind to it, we change the dynamic of district attorneys across the country. When we put our mind to it, we put people in office. That's why you see such resistance in trying to minimize our ability to fully engage and participate in the electoral process.
So when you talk about engagement, for example, what is the NAACP doing to engage younger voters? We have seen, many news reports over the past, handful of years that younger voters, for whatever reason, and I am not in that number because I'm not a younger voter, but younger voters seem to be younger Black voters, I should say, seem to be disengaged for whatever reason. They don't believe that their vote counts, even when we talk about local elections, such as in Baltimore. And you probably seen this, where there have been uh, city council votes in this last primary that have literally been separated by just a few hundred votes. But for some reason, are younger voters just not seeing that? Why is it that they may not believe that their vote counts?
So let's be clear. Again, I don't subscribe to the negative narrative.
Okay.
Young people across communities don't vote at the same level of older people. Individuals participate based on social economics and their understanding between the connection between their votes and their economic or quality of life. And so as people get older, they're more likely to engage than younger people across all race demographics. Secondly, economics also drive the question around voting. That if you're talking about tax policy, those who are of higher means participate more so than those of lower means because of tax policy. Secondly, if you look at local elections versus federal elections versus state elections, it's about marketing. Local elections actually garner in the neighborhood of less than 35% of eligible voters across demographics participating. So you get lower turnout for local elections compared to federal elections. Well, what's the difference? There's more investments in educating around candidates in upcoming elections. So once you turn the corner from August to November, you're going to see a high increase in political ads and commercials, both on traditional broadcast media, cable, and platforms. So you are making people aware that elections coming up. Well, that's about dollars investing around marketing. And so we must be careful as a community not to buy into a false narrative because it only reinforces the very thing that we must get away from, because young people across communities vote less because one, education, marketing, understanding of the connective tissue between their interests and their vote around tax policy. Many young people are trying to figure out career paths, but once they're educated and they know about it, they understand the value of the vote, you see an increase. And that increase is oftentimes aligned with the marketing dollars that's invested in turning out the vote.
Before I take a break, let me do a little anecdotal thing for you. If you are walking down the street and you encounter a young black man under the age of 30, he doesn't know that you are Derek Johnson, president and CEO of the NAACP, and he's standing with a group of young men, all of whom are having a discussion about not voting. What do you say to them to convince them not who to vote for, but why to vote? I want you to think about that question, because I know it's a complex question, and it has multiple layers. But I need to take a break, and when we come back, I want to hear your answer to that. Don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Daily Drum will continue on Sirius XM channel 141. The Original Quiet Storm with John Mons is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation tonight with Derek Johnson, president and CEO of the NAACP. We have a wide range of topics to talk to with this critical news maker. Before the break, I threw out a hypothetical asking him what would he say to a collection of young black men just standing outside talking about why, or that they would not vote, and they not know who he is as one of the major civil rights movers and shakers in this country. How would you have a conversation with them?
Sure, and I could move it from anecdotal to actual. Last Sunday, I was in my hometown of Detroit. It's a group of young individuals who were formerly incarcerated. First, step one, listen to their conversation. Don't assume the posture of an expert. So as I listened, I began to hear their concerns. Secondly, begin to take into consideration their concerns and put it back to them in terms of now what you're going to do about it. In this particular conversation, it was about, well, we don't see any progress. Nothing is taking place. Well, one gentleman, mother is now the chairman of the parole board. And because she's there, many more young people are actually having opportunities because she has a compassionate heart. And I say, just 20 years ago, your mother would not have been in that position. So you can't say progress isn't being made because you live in a household that demonstrates where the progress is going to be. Secondly, the elections is not about candidate A or candidate B, particularly this election for the highest part of office. We're talking about chess, not checkers. And so you may not like either one of the candidates, but things you need to consider. One, in a two-party system, there isn't a third-party option here. That it's a throwaway vote if you go for a third party, and the outcome of that will be against your interests. And secondly, if you sit it out, you have conceded defeat as opposed to getting in the game, and you must stay in the game. You don't win at basketball or football on the sidelines talking about what the quarterback should have done. You get in the game to score. But then finally, you may not like any of the options, but those aren't the options. And so you have to participate to get to the next step. And in participating, what do you have as those options? You know what will happen if one person is in there. It opens the door to white supremacist activity that we just witnessed and we don't want to go back to. And you know what can happen if the other person get in there. At least it keeps some guardrails in place and we don't go to fascism. Oh, let me explain what fascism is. There is no rule of law, so you could be a target because somebody woke up and don't like you. So you have to play chess to get us from this moment to the next moment. You only do that if you participate.
Speaking of the presidential politics, for example, I know that President Biden last week spoke to the NAACP. Trial notwithstanding, has an invitation been extended to former President Trump, the likely Republican presidential nominee? And if so, what has been the answer?
So two things here. Last Sunday, President Biden spoke to the Detroit branch NAACP. It's our largest branch. It was about 6,000 people there for that sit-down dinner. It was an excellent banquet as they put together great banquets every year. For our convention coming in July, yes, we have extended invitations to both candidates, as we do. We are nonprofit. We don't tell people how to vote. We invite both. And so we are waiting to hear back whether or not they accept the invitation to speak to our delegates as we convene in Las Vegas in July. It's something we do every year. Every year Trump was in office, we extended an invitation. He only began to consider it that last year because he was trying to figure out how to court the black vote. But this is not about a transaction. Because if it comes, there will be a real conversation. What are you going to do to guarantee that you should get the black vote? Same kind of conversation to President Biden. And in that discussion, it'll give our delegates, our members, and our supporters an opportunity to hear from both candidates. Now, I don't think President Trump is going to show up because we would not concede our microphone for him to spew venom on a microphone. It would be a facilitated conversation. Why facilitated conversation? Because we want to get to the essence of what is he going to do for the black community if he gets elected, and how is he going to do anything different than what he did before? Same conversation we'll have with Biden. I submit to you, I doubt if he shows up.
Let's see. What do you say to, again, young, civic-minded Black people who may express concerns that the Urban League is past its prime? It is for older civil rights activists, but may not necessarily be addressing some of the issues that they want with the vigor outside of protesting. How do you counter that argument?
Well, I think it's a false argument and a distraction at best. The Urban League has been around 114 years. I support the Urban League and Mark Mariel. Their mission is to provide training, job training, among other things, as service providers. And we need everything in our community, institutional wise, to help propel our community to improve the quality of life, not only of our current reality, but future. So any young person who say, well, the Urban League shouldn't exist anymore, well, I challenge them. I say, well, pick a vehicle for your voice. You don't have to join the Urban League. You don't even have to come over here with the NAACP or any organization, but join something. Kwame Ture, Howard graduate, Stokely Carmichael, he said, organize, organize, organize. And that's what I'm an advocate for. I don't say join this organization over that organization. I do say use your voice. And if you can't do it individually, join something so that we can be a stronger community because of your voice. Whatever vehicle you choose, whether it's NAACP, the Urban League, National Council of Negro Women, or a chapter of a Black Lives Matter in your local community, I don't care. But whatever it is, serve our community so we can strengthen our community and create a better future for our community.
How do you believe that the NAACP has evolved, has modernized its positions, its marketing to open it up to more activists?
Well, I don't have to believe it. I look at my numbers. My membership has increased. The number of our chapters have increased. We're in 47 states, close to 2,600 units across the country. That our engagement on social media has increased in the 6 years I've been in this position. When you think about the Image Awards, our ratings have more than doubled. So I don't have to guess at it. I'm looking at the data. We have to be a data-driven operation like any other operations, and we continue to evolve and grow. The average age of our membership has actually gone down. The average age of the Black community is 34 years old. So as an organization, we have to appeal to the 37-year-old in order for us to continue to be a relevant organization. And so many individuals pick NAACP as their vehicle for voice. Just 2 weeks ago, we were at William & Mary University where some of our young people got arrested for protest. We approved the protest. We was there. We got them out of jail. We are being accountable to our members and we're addressing their needs. That's how we continue to evolve.
This may kind of go back to something we discussed earlier, but I think one of the things, a story out of Virginia a week or so ago, where a school board in rural Virginia voted to restore Confederate names to schools. Obviously, there was a wave of removing Confederate statues, renaming schools, buildings, from elementary schools all the way up to college campuses, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. If this is to be an example, do you believe that there is a move to reverse what we saw for 2 years ago?
Well, progress is never in a straight line. It's a pendulum that's swing left to right. But we're moving forward in that swing to left or right. So with every success and victory, there will always be a counter. And we should anticipate that. That has been the history. But so long as we're pushing forward, that community, as unfortunate as it is, they're doing their young people a disservice. And I'm not talking about their young Black kids, I'm talking about the young white kids. Because as we're trying to recreate a false narrative in history, we're in a global economy. And the countries we're competing with, they know the true history. And so they're going to disadvantage their young white kids so they can't compete in a global economy by feeding a false narrative that can never be revisited. And so as they're competing against young people in in England or in Japan or in Canada or in Finland, they are put at a disadvantage. For us, we must continue to push forward, recognizing there will be pushbacks, but the force of our push forward continues to have momentum. It will continue to topple them over, even when it doesn't feel like it. And we know it's taking place because the vigor in which they're fighting back is something that we could have never accounted for just 10 years ago, 5 years ago. But as long as we fight, we win. So we must continue to fight.
Let's talk a little bit about HBCUs. Um, Howard University had its largest graduating class in history. Other HBCUs are seeing a surge that we first saw again, unfortunately, after the death of George Floyd. What role do you believe the NAACP is playing or can play in the continued growth and support of HBCUs? And how do you believe the role of HBCUs more broadly has evolved in this country?
So first of all, the increase in enrollment at Howard is another example that we're actually succeeding in this fight. The fact that you have a vice president of the United States who is a graduate of Howard University did more for Howard's enrollment than perhaps anything else. The reality of that vice president sitting in the office is a direct result of the NAACP and other organizations pushing for full franchisement of the Black vote, making sure Black folks got out and voted, and to ensure that we were successful with our vote in terms of executing that vote. That's a beautiful thing. Let's celebrate that. Let's not think that because there's a counterattack that we're losing when we're winning. The role of the NAACP has always been one to support and backstop our Black institutions, be them HBCUs, the Urban League, or anything else. That will continue to be the case. That's why we have fought so hard with a campaign around eliminating student debt. Many HBCUs were strapped in terms of their alumni being able to give back because they owe so much in student debt. And in the fight in terms of cancel student debt, the things that we took on was making sure there was revision in the public service loan forgiveness program. Why? Because majority of Black folks are employed by the government or nonprofits. Public service give an allowance for that. And if you work for the government or nonprofit for more than 10 years, your debt is automatically canceled. That's important. Now that freed up a whole 2 generations of student loan borrowers to actually give back to their HBCUs, actually have the ability to send their children to HBCUs as opposed to a community college, and more importantly, be proud of the education received from those institutions so they can be positions like I am. I'm a graduate of an HBCU. I'm proud of it. My wife is a graduate of HBCU. My 2 oldest sons are graduates of HBCUs. My daughter and my youngest son is at an HBCU. I'm an HBCU supporter, like the NAACP will continue to be a supporter of an HBCU.
You can say where you went.
I went to Tougaloo College. Look here, there's all pride there. There's
yes, indeed. Morgan State here, and my dad went to Howard. So. And my daughter went to Howard, so the third generation HBCU. Definitely, I'm biased in that regard. Definitely, no question about it.
And be clear, the track record of HBCUs is unmatched. We send more young people to medical school than any other undergraduate program. We send more young Black kids to law school, like I attended law school with my wife, than any other program. We send more Black folks to graduate and professional schools than any other program. It is unmatched. Why? Because when you're on those campuses, you don't have to defend your Blackness. You can explore intellectually all type of things, participate in the cultural richness of who we are, and come out stronger. So when you get to a professional school or a graduate program, you have more confidence in your ability to succeed than any other student that's on that campus, despite the challenges and the hurdles that's put in front of you. So HBCUs are a key ingredient to the success of the Black community across this country, and we must always promote them.
One of the things, and I'm sure that you are familiar with this. Just last week, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was reintroduced by Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and we know that when it was first introduced in 2020, there was very, very little movement. This comes on the fourth, just days before the fourth anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. Considering what's happening on Capitol Hill, do you believe that the thing is dead on arrival, or that there is some hope for it?
So, understanding that this is one of the most dysfunctional Congress in the history of Congress. It took 15 votes just to get a Speaker of the House. You've already had attempts to dislodge the Speaker. So, unfortunately, I don't anticipate much coming through the House of Representatives. However, we must always reintroduce good legislation that's in our interest so the issue never dies. But we also need to recognize that November would define what the next Congress look like. And so as we reintroduce the bill to keep the conversation going, we must fully engage politically and vote to ensure we have a Congress that best reflects the needs and interests of our community, which is inclusive of police reform. There's no reason why there's not a national database of police misconduct. Police officers are going from agency to agency causing harm. There is no reason why we don't have a nationally accredited training where police officers must be recertified. There is no reason why the whole concept of qualified immunity would shield officers from being held accountable. Your badge should not be a shield to accountability. I could go on and on. Those are the things that's good for policing, but also will keep our community safe from bad police officers.
But you said that, excuse me, keeping this issue alive, considering the way that the House of Representatives is right now, it may not happen. It may just be symbolic. Is symbolism enough? Is that important?
No, it's not about symbolism. It's about being prepared and being positioned. So something could happen where they don't have the votes to stop what they want to stop. We've already seen the gap between those who want to do something that's progressive versus conservatives narrow since the Speaker came in because of special elections and other things. So this is not about symbolism. This is about being positioned. You can't be positioned if you don't introduce the legislation, and being prepared. The legislation is already prepared. So if by happenstance there's a change in the number of members available to vote on any particular item, if we don't have the legislation in place and position and is not properly annotated with the right code sections, we can never advance. So that's about being positioned and prepared. This is not about symbolism.
I would like to hear your reaction to the sentencing of a former Baltimore City State's Attorney, Marilyn Mosby, last week. There was a lot of, one could argue politicization of her cases, but in the end, the judge did not address those. The judge basically sentenced her to time served, 12 months home detention, and said, I'm paraphrasing from the bench, she did not want to have her be away from her children. Overall, your thoughts about that?
I think it was selective prosecution targeted her for political reasons for a crime that wasn't a crime. It was her money in her retirement account that she was advised by her financial advisor she could access to invest in property to improve the quality of life for her daughters. What was the harm? Who was the victim? We led a petition so other organizations sign to have it even pardoned. The Justice Department went against their own recommendations to go after Marilyn Mosley. They would not even consider a crime of this nature if it did not arise to something over $1 million. We're talking about $50,000. The question is, why did this set of prosecutors go after her? It was politically motivated. I am grateful that the judge recognized the disproportionate harm that would have been created had she been sent to jail to her young daughters. It is an unfortunate reality, a miscarriage of justice. And as an organization, we're going to continue to advocate for that federal crime to be pardoned so she can go back to be a productive mother to those young girls that she have to raise.
Usually in an appeal, usually in a federal pardon, a presidential pardon, those individuals who have been convicted are pardoned after admitting to guilt. She says she maintains her innocence, and wants to appeal. Do you believe that could get in the way of a possible appeal from President Biden?
Well, your statement usually it means, but this is not a usual case. This was selective prosecution that should have never taken place, and she should not admit guilt to something that should have never taken place. That was already proven. The real question is, will we stand as a society to allow a young, talented lawyer who assumed the right position as DA to try to clean up some of the harsh treatment that the Baltimore police officers were committing on residents of Baltimore and turn around and let individuals punish her from doing her job? That should never be the case. This is not a usual circumstance, and we're going to continue to advocate for full pardon of her as a result of this selective prosecution.
Another issue that I did want to ask you about, and this goes to the intersection of race, it goes to and politics and Black culture and who we are. As you are aware, Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear wants to use Juneteenth this month as a way to highlight and of course ban discrimination based on hairstyles for people of color, what is commonly known in Maryland, in Texas, and other states as the Crown Act. Your thoughts about what Governor Beshear is trying to do?
I hope other governors take that lead. Here you have a governor in a state with less than 20% African American population, and he was willing to take the lead to address what is a discriminatory practice against Black folks for having the beautiful hair that God gave them and willing to dress it as it should. There should never be discrimination based on hair, especially Black hair. It is a part of who we are as our culture. We should not have to go and put chemicals in our hair, particularly women's, just to conform to a standard that God did not, bring us into this earth with. He or she blessed us with beautifully curly hair. It should be celebrated. It should be highlighted. Again, we are in a global economy. No one should be conforming to a standard that's foreign to who we are as a community. Mm-hmm. Natural hair is beautiful in the Black community and in all of its glory. And so I commend Governor Beshear for having enough courage to do so. Now, he's term limited, so he can do a lot of stuff. but I also challenge more governors to stand up and do the same.
Why do you suppose this issue has come up again? Obviously, there was a movement with the Crown Act several years ago, at least in the state of Maryland, which is a bluish purple state, if you want to talk about the politics of it. But the state of Maryland seemed to get it. Texas, not so much. And so why is this issue coming up again? What's going on from your standpoint about the Crown Act and Black hair?
Well, it's all a part of the pushback as a result of our success. Race has always been a tool used to maintain domination and control. So if you want to take on race, you take on everything about it. You use one's hair as a way to create barriers. You use one's dialect. You use one's dress. You use all the things that make up who we are culturally to create barriers and distractions. The distractive nature around this is really important because we will be up in arms about hair and it's intentionally put there and lose focus on tax policy. We'll be up in arms about music and the battle between Drake and Kendrick Lamar and lose focus on education policy. And so as we have to fight on multiple fronts, we also need to recognize what's being put out there as a distraction and why and the timing of it, because at the end of the day, what we're confronted with is who's getting taxed, who's not taxed, and where those tax dollars are spent, and what are the regulatory policies in place to keep corporate behavior in check. And if that's the real fight here, and if that is the real fight, all type of things will be put out there to distract us and have us burn energy over here when the regulatory policy determines whether or not we're paid a fair wage, a minimum wage, or a living wage. The tax policy is whether or not we're being overtaxed as a community and those tax dollars are not being spent in our community. That's what the real conversation should be about. The future of work and how those tax dollars are being utilized to train the future workforce that's coming out of our community, as opposed to dumbing down our young people so they won't be competitive in a global economy. You put something over here to be distracting. We have to be focused on what the real nature of power is about as we fight these cultural attacks.
Derrick Johnson, President and CEO of the NAACP. Thank you so much for spending some extended time with us for us to get your thoughts on this wide range of topics. I really, really appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much. And for your audience, join the NAACP. We need all the brain power we can get. And I think the Howard broader community is just what we need.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank
That
you.
is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, May 28th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.